Welcome to Kemoki's Ikigai room, where I answer questions and discuss things raised at my commentary page, which I will post in the description below. So if you have any questions or comments, please write yours there. Today I will discuss Alexis Minkov's point. I read what Alexis wrote. What do you think of Yukio Mishima's work about his political views and what people in Japan think of him? I know it's not very much Ikigai related, but I'm really curious what you think. Thank you. Um, you know, uh, I, Yukio Mishima is a really controversial figure, but he's a genius and he's uh, not ignored. I think this is a very important point because once somebody passes away, his influence and his works would, you know, rapidly disappear. I have seen it happen to many famous writers and authors. I have many friends in Japanese publishing world, and they say that once a writer or author is gone, most of the time his or her works will be, quickly forgotten. So in the case of Mishima, I think his influence is increasing with time. So there was something really intense and unique in his writings and in his existence. And I'm sure Yukio Mishima is going to stay for many, many years from now, maybe forever, as long as human civilization exists. And when you think of Yukio Mishima, another figure is very important in association. That is Yasunari Kawabata, who received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1968. And, I think Edward Zeidensticker really did a great job in um, bringing the world's attention to Kawabata's through his translation of Snow Country, for example. And now Kawabata is a really different type of author compared to Mishima. Kawabata writes about what is genuinely Japanese, what is authentically Japanese, and Kawabata writes about the vulnerabilities of human heart. I mean, the fact that we can be wounded and we can be fragile, and it is related to the Japanese concept of mono no aware. So Kawabata is, in the true sense of the word, a very Japanese author, and he has shown that what he writes has universal repercussions across the world. So it was probably fitting that Kawabata became the first Japanese novelist to receive the Nobel Prize, and followed by Kenzaburo Oe. And Kenzaburo Oe is a kind of a different type of writer. I mean, his novels are more existentialism based, and his philosophical musings subserved with a really strong sense of morality and social awareness of social issues and so on. So quite different from Kawabata. But anyway, the reason I mentioned Kawabata is that because Yukio Mishima and Yasunari Kawabata were very closely related, and some people say both of these wonderful authors, writers, novelists, they took their own lives. I mean, sadly, to the loss of the world and to the loss of themselves and to the loss of their loved ones. But it is a sad fact. And some people say that if it was not Yasunari Kawabata, but Yukio Mishima who received the Nobel Prize for Literature, both of them might have been, living for many, many years more. I think this is a really interesting argument because Yukio Mishima, I think he wanted the Nobel Prize badly, but because he was young, he was relatively young, I think there was this almost political understanding that it'll be appropriate for Yasunari Kawabata to receive the prize first, and then as some years later, maybe Mishima can receive the prize. Of course, this has nothing to do with the, you know, genuine values of their works, but it it shows a lot of critical, you know, resonances because Kawabata, I think, as I said, Kawabata is writer of vulnerabilities, human vulnerabilities, and in that, I think Kawabata is actually uh, has a resonance with many American novelists because, as I understand it, great literary works coming from the United States is about this human condition of vulnerability, imperfection, the fact that we age, we fail, we you know stumble, we are imperfect, and that awareness, I think, is behind many great works of literature coming from the United States. And the same is true for um, Yasunari Kawabata. All his works are about human vulnerabilities. And, so the Kawabata attitude to vulnerabilities is more really intimate and private. And whereas Mishima's approach to human vulnerabilities is much more open and more stylized and more political. I don't remember where I read it, but somebody mentioned about the literature of Yukio Mishima that his works were like the frames, of a picture. There is this really gorgeous, elaborate frame, but well, the critic was rather harsh about the value of work for Mishima, and he said there was only this frame for a painting, and there was no painting there. That, he said, was what Yukio Mishima's literary works amounted to, which I think is probably not so appropriate when you think of Yukio Mishima's great works. But there's also some truth in there that Yukio Mishima was more concerned with external repercussions of our work rather than the private, really intimate details of the works. And in that, his works are in marked contrast with Yasunari Kawabata's works. So, the fact that Yasunari Kawabata received the Nobel Prize, and Yukio Mishima didn't, probably kick-started a chain reaction in their, really delicate mindsets, and which resulted in both of these, wonderful creators taking their own lives, which was really sad. About Yukio Mishima's political views, I think, as I said, it's really controversial. But I can say that. Probably for Mishima, everything was ultimately existential and private. I mean, even when he talks about Japan or the emperor of tradition, conservatism, political right wing views, I think ultimately Mishima was actually talking about himself. Because after all, he's an artist, he's not a politician. And I think he had this unique approach to lives and uh, death and love and the self and the others. And he was acting philosopher. He was a person with really deep thinking, but also very sometimes superficial activities. And it was the combination of these deeply resonant philosophy and sometimes superficial activism that made Yukio Mishima a truly unique individual. And throughout his career as a writer, and some occasional political activist, I think the underlying tone was his own sense of life, death, and errors, and the difficulties associated with human existence and so on. And so I think that ultimately led to his, um, you know, catastrophe. I don't know of any other words, catastrophe. So so that is, I think, the essential aspect of Yukio Mishima's work. So, because it was something ultimately private, ultimately really individualistic, his political views, if there were any, didn't really have a strong impact on Japanese political system, because it was felt that ultimately Mishima Yukio was an artist, not a politician. So whatever political statement that he might have made should be ultimately interpreted in terms of the art value, if you like. So that's why I think people generally respect Yukio Mishima's work, but not so much his political views, because not because they were rubbish, but because they were you know, more or less coming from the private, intimate arena of human creativity. So should be, they should be interpreted as such. So that's why I think Yukio Mishima didn't have any significant impact on the real politics, whereas he did have and continues to have deeply felt influence on how people appreciate literature and the arts and our human condition itself. So I think Yukio Mishima has a lot of you know wonderful things to say about the philosophy of life, of which, of course, Ikigai is a part. So, Yukio Mishima's work, I think, has a lot of, you know, poignant relevance to the question of Ikigai.